In 2017, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds was an instant success, topping the charts and starting an entirely new wave of gaming that dominated the industry for years to come. Still today, it stands as the most sold game on all of Steam, but there's a huge hole in the community that once made up this game, and it's no secret that PUBG now lives in the shadow of its mobile port. So what made PUBG so good? In the beginning, PUBG was a survival game. The goal was to be the last one standing, 1 out of 100 players. You were given somewhat of a sandbox to play with, a massive map full of a variety of different environments, vehicles that are fun to drive, and many different weapons with the most satisfying gunplay I've ever felt in a video game. The game had a perfect balance of randomness and consistency. The loot was random, the zones were random, the fights were random, but every game you knew you had to loot to gear up, move to stay in the zone, and fight to survive. Every game had the same rules but a different story, and it was up to you to tell whatever story you wanted with the tools they gave you. I think PUBG had a formula that was destined to fail eventually. As people got better at the game, they got bored of the slow, quiet survival gameplay. The most fun part of the game was the fighting. So what if you could just skip all the fluff and get straight into the action? Certain locations, especially central ones, would grow to be highly contested upon dropping. The skies of places like School and Hacienda would be full of parachutes. You'd look around and see about half the server all heading to one spot. A new playstyle was born, and the best players would frag out. For experienced players, PUBG wasn't about surviving to get a win anymore. Most good players would hot drop, get a vehicle, and hunt down as many players as they could. They treat PUBG like it was Call of Duty instead of a battle royale, leaving the quiet and slow moments feeling boring as opposed to building tension and adding to the story like they once did. Players were essentially turning PUBG into a deathmatch shooter with unreasonably large maps and respawn times. And with this change in playstyle, PUBG began to lose its original identity. But what I think really killed the PUBG we all know and love isn't the change in the habits of the player base, but instead the new design philosophy, which to be honest with you, I don't know what the hell it is. PUBG has had a huge identity crisis, and I'm not just talking about the furry costumes and Fortnite dances. We'll get to that later. There's absolutely no consistency or reason behind anything the developers implement in this game anymore. Every update feels like the developers have to work on the game without being allowed to communicate with each other. They make what should be a significant change to the gameplay, but only commit 10%. For example, PUBG added respawning to the game. If your teammate dies, you can now pick up a blue chip off their body and take it to a recall system to bring them back into the game. I thought this was a good implementation, as it makes playing the game with friends more enjoyable without taking all the stakes out of the game. The game is still punishing, since if your team dies, you're back to the lobby, same as always. But if you get flushed and your team is alive, it gives you an incentive to stick around and stay engaged in the game. I thought it was a good implementation until I actually tried it. Once your teammate brings your blue chip to a recall system, a countdown to the next phase of the match starts, usually hundreds of seconds long before you actually get dropped back into the game.
Boarding the plane in 370 seconds? Dude, this game is dog shit.
If your teammate survives to the next phase, a helicopter will bring you out with absolutely no loot over what's usually a tiny zone with a couple compounds that already have fully looted teams in them.
Bro, I am so far away from you. I'm just gonna spawn die. Who the f designed this game?
Despite the goal of the recall system, it really doesn't make me feel any more incentivized to stick around. And not only is the recall system poorly implemented, but it isn't even on every map. Vikendi and Tego feature an even worse respawning mechanic called the comeback arena, and despite it being called the same thing on both of the maps, it functions slightly differently on each one. On Vikendi, you get 3 opportunities, while on Tego, only those who die in the first blue zone phase are eligible. In both cases, your goal is to survive the rest of the players in the comeback arena, and then you'll be sent back mainland to continue the match. It is again an unnecessarily slow process to get back into the game, except this time you at least get to have some loot so you won't die immediately. The recall system is clearly inspired by the banner system in Apex Legends, except it's substantially worse due to the sheer amount of time it takes to happen, and the comeback arena is clearly inspired by the Gulag in Warzone, but is also substantially worse for the same reason, as well as the fact that there's absolutely no incentive to fight during it. While Warzone requires you to win a 1v1 to return to the game, all you have to do in the comeback arena is just survive the timer. Oh, and some maps just don't even have a respawning mechanic at all. This is what PUBG development looks like now, a complete disregard for any consistency or cohesion, and a huge lack of confidence and commitment. PUBG adds new vehicles and weapons to the game with every major update, but then only adds them to one map. Some guns are only available on one map, some are available on a couple, and some are available on all. Luckily, if your favorite gun isn't available on a map, you can go to an error zone to find weapons from the other maps. Oh wait, The error zone is only on Tego. And lots of maps have their own exclusive RNG zone that diminishes the gameplay. Vikendi has random blizzards which hinder your sight, slowly damage you, and makes vehicles more difficult to control. Rondo has the EMP zone which disables weapon scopes, vehicles, and tactical gear. Miramar has sandstorms that obstruct vision, slow movement, and damages you. Erangel and Sandhawk have the red zone.
Only losers die in the red zone, man.
And Karakin has the black zone, which is kind of like the red zone, except you can't hide from it in buildings. Credit where credit is due though, 2 of those were map exclusive for thematic reasons. Airdrops on some maps drop 1 crate, and on others drop a bunch. Certain buildings on Vikendi require a crowbar to open. Multiple maps have secret room keys. Certain buildings on Karakin require sticky bombs to open, and that's also the only map that even has sticky bombs. And pots on Tego can be broken, uncovering loot inside. And there's no universal signifier for these special loot spots. But by far the most ridiculous map exclusive feature was added to Rondo in update 27.2 and is an entire map specific currency with different leveled markets where you can buy and sell items. Again, taking a feature from Warzone and Apex, but only making it a feature on 1/9 of the maps. Along with the market, they added an in-game challenge list exclusively on Rondo. Completing the challenges will give you items. For example, destroy 2 vehicle tires for a free flash hider, or loot 1 smoke grenade and get a vertical grip. This update also added NPC guards that guard level 3 markets and safes around the map where you can find gold bars to use in the market. Again, exclusive to Rondo, of course. As of update 29.1, you can use explosives to make trenches in the ground, but only if they explode on grass and only on Rondo. And as I'm editing this, they just added a zipline gun only on Rondo as well. Why does every map feel like a completely different video game? Of course, some map exclusive features are exclusive for good reason. For example, snowmobiles should only be on the snow map, but many, if not most, seem completely random. And I've only scratched the surface of these features because many of them are too all over the place for me to even keep track of. PUBG's developers are clearly worried about the game growing still if they don't add anything, while also being too scared to make any significant changes across the whole game. This causes them to awkwardly walk this line of inconsistency that I think is too overly complicated for new players to digest and too random for competitive players to enjoy, completely missing every potential target audience. It seems like they want to try out a lot of new things, but adding them to the old maps would piss off too much of the player base, so they add them exclusively to the new maps. But the problem is you can't opt out of playing them, so you just end up rolling the dice every game. But I've yet to talk about the first thing that I think came to every PUBG player's mind when they read the title of this video, and that's the departure from the original vision and intentional betrayal of the game's core branding and identity. In the beginning, PUBG was an indie game, the vision of a man named Brendan Green with development help from a relatively small dev team under Bluehole. Eventually, Brendan Green would step down and Bluehole would later consolidate its subsidiaries under a new corporate entity named Krafton. This change has led to many design decisions that destroy the homogeneity of the game. When competition initially arose, PUBG continued to stand out with its grounded and grungy realistic gameplay. Still today, no other game has replaced PUBG as the big realistic battle royale shooter, but PUBG just stopped being it. Now PUBG features zip lines, infinite parachutes, and emergency pickups which clash with the game's traditionally grounded gameplay. It used to be that player movement was limited to where players could safely move on foot or in a vehicle. Now, a player can go up and down high-rise buildings in seconds, they can jump from any height without any danger, and they can call a plane to come pick them up by wire and take them across the whole map. Update 27.2 added emergency cover flares to the game, which when thrown summon cover out of the sky, literally out of thin air. And this is what the devs have to say about it.
Not realistic enough? Trust me. No one's got time to question its origins when you're in the middle of a fight.
But where the stylistic deviation is most immediately obvious is in the visuals. Originally, the visual style was inspired by games like Arma and DayZ, as well as the 2000 film Battle Royale. The dark cosmetics reflected the hardcore survival gameplay accordingly. Now, cosmetics include a large array of saturated colors, animal costumes, and brand integrations, and this trend isn't limited to player clothing. Helmets, weapon skins, backpacks, and vehicles have seen this change as well. And when you change vehicle skins, now you get this weird science fiction animation where your character performs magic, waving their hands around and transforming the vehicle into something new. This one especially bothers me because it's so unnecessary. Having timed events for things like using meds and reviving makes sense from a gameplay perspective, but why would you have one for changing vehicle skins? Especially when things like entering and exiting the vehicle and swapping seats happens instantly. And speaking of animations, emotes. There's nothing that breaks the immersion of a life or death fight for survival more than a TikTok dance. Emotes now also include sprays and props your character pulls out of thin air. I'm not the type to advocate for realism over enjoyable gameplay. Not everything has to be perfectly realistic. From the beginning, PUBG has had unrealistic features like reviving, guns that magically stick to your back, and many more things. But at the same time, in the beginning, the game had a consistent style, and now it's just a random clutter of drastically different artistic visions. It makes you wonder who the target audience is. But I actually think it's abundantly clear who the target audience is: consumers. PUBG doesn't feel like PUBG anymore. It feels like a large company bought PUBG to use it as a brand to sell skins. And I think that's exactly what happened. I think that the combination of the change in behavior from the players, the inconsistent and unconfident additions to the game, and the departure from the original style all mixed together to create something so detached from the original identity of the game that any unique draw it had for Battle Royale players was lost. When you go into PUBG now, you don't even really know what you're signing up for. It's so different from the original vision that it's almost unrecognizable. This is what I think killed PUBG. But what do I mean when I say PUBG is dead? The thing is, PUBG still has a relatively good player count, averaging around 200,000 concurrent players. Far from its peak, but also not to the point where you can't get into a game. Most of the time at least. But for some reason the PUBG community still feels dead. PUBG's online presence is predominantly PUBG mobile content, and its mainstream reach is pretty much strictly mobile. When you Google PUBG, it literally says PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, mobile game. Of course, it's hard not to be outshined by a game that has been downloaded over 1 billion times, but it's not just that it's outshined by mobile. There is genuinely a hole in the community. Every streamer who rode the PUBG wave to success has either moved on to different games or has lost their viewership. PUBG PC content isn't just overshadowed. It's gone. But I'm not just a man of complaints, I'm a man of solutions, and I'm about to give my controversial take on how I believe PUBG Corp can revive their game. Take a leaf out of the book of 2 games who have managed to sustain a healthy online presence and community for the last 11 years. Rust and DayZ. The first step would be to implement something PUBG promised years ago: mod support, and use the Steam Workshop to make the modding process user-friendly. Then scrap the current lobby system in the game and replace it with a server browser. They can still have the official servers like Rust and DayZ, where they'd keep the regular Battle Royale queue for all the players who like the game as it is now. But for anyone who wants to change anything, it would now be possible for them to do it. By giving the community full freedom with your game, you're opening it up to an infinite variety in content and entirely new communities to form. You already have all the ingredients for the perfect game: massive maps full of a variety of environments, vehicles that are fun to drive, and many different weapons with the most satisfying gunplay I've ever felt in a video game. Give all of those ingredients and full creative control to the very audience that you're attempting to captivate, and watch the game that captivates them take shape. Let your core audience be the developers, and you'll never lose your community or the devs. And the last step is to get people talking about PUBG again, and I think that the best way to do this is to do something else they've been talking about doing for years: upgrade to Unreal Engine 5. Unreal Engine 5 is the latest gaming buzzword. This, paired with the graphical overhaul or even a simple RTX on option in the settings, would be sure to get tons of content creators talking about the game again. And maybe they could even add volumetric smoke physics and call it PUBG 2.
Ninja, don't act like you